So it's time to take back control of your life and overcome pandemic fatigue. This is a virtual panel discussion where we will take and look at understanding what pandemic fatigue is, how do we recognize it, and what coping mechanisms can be used to help regain control of your life. So we are going to be looking at a couple different aspects. Again, my name is Claude Jones. I will be your moderator for this evening, and I would now like to introduce our wonderful panelists. So we are going to start with Serena Santillanes. I think I pronounced that correctly. I got a little help earlier today. But Serena is the founder, president, as well as a professional career counselor and facilitator with Career Journeys. With over 20 years of experience, Serena has been a creator of innovative professional development programs in emotional intelligence, leadership, and career development for prominent universities, organizations, and corporate teams. She has also assisted thousands of career transitioning adults in realizing their professional aspirations. She has a master's degree in counseling, career counseling, and is a licensed professional clinical counselor. Serena's passion is around developing practical solutions that transform people, teams, and organizations. Serena, welcome.
Thank you, Claude, and you did a great job with my name.
Very much. Had a great coach. Look at that clip. Already put into practice there. All right. Next, I'd like to introduce Elise Boggs, certified emotional intelligence coach, professional or professor of leadership, and a leadership coach and consultant. Over the last 15 years, she has supported the development of thousands of leaders across the many different industries, including military, medicine, law enforcement, engineering, technology, education, and entertainment. You're gonna have to tell me some of the important folks you talked with there. Notable clients include the US Navy SEALs, Adobe, FedEx, and American Red Cross. Her mission is to help people become skilled leaders. Elise, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Claude. Excited to be here.
Awesome. And last but not least, we have James Vinn. James, you know, you're a local San Diego hero, James. President of San Diego Experience Design, a community of over 3,000 UX professionals who meet regularly to foster education, connection.
You want to watch this with me? It's not techie. Do you want to watch this with me? It's not very techie.
Oh, it's not too techie here. We are a very inclusive tech group. So this will be a great conversation. And for those that are on, if you could do me a favor and just go on mute during the presentation. All right, so James runs San Diego Experience Design, a community of over 3,000 UX professionals who meet regularly to foster education, connection, and inspiration. He has a BS in human-computer interaction from UC Irvine and specializes in quantitative user research. James previously worked in biotech at Thermo Fisher Scientific and medical devices at Reflexon Health. Did I say that? Reflexon Health? Did I say that correct, James?
You got it. Thanks for the intro, Claude. So excited to be here.
Always good to talk to you, bud. Okay,
Likewise.
so the way that this is going to work, we're going to cover a couple different topics with this, with this discussion. So we're going to dive into pandemic fatigue, what it is, what's going on, and some tips to help overcome it. And then I know people have to be fed up from being locked up. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. And then taking a look at flexibility, working from home, and then burnout and how there's some correlation there. Not every company has embraced the concept of remote working and flexible working. And so what are some of those concerns and how can we overcome that? And then lastly, we'll wrap up with, a view post-COVID. What are some of the things that we can anticipate in what's going on? Now, I'm hoping that we have some great time for some Q&A from the audience. If not, there's a couple other things that we can bring up. But I want this to be a lively discussion. Our panelists are here ready to give you some advice. And without further ado, I think we're ready to get into this. So our first topic or theme is the impact of pandemic fatigue. Now, our nation has been dealing with some challenges. And a Gallup survey had polled some Americans, or just some people, and they asked them this very simple question. In general, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the way things are going in the United States? And if you can look on this graph here, in February, we were at the highest, in a decade, almost a decade. And then, March, things just started plummeting, and you can see how things are now pretty much at its lowest, here in July at 13%. And so when we start looking at why we're not satisfied as a nation, aside from a lot of the sort of struggles that we're seeing with some of the racial divide, the pandemic has just been top of mind with everything. Looking at the numbers, at least in August, I'm not quite sure if these have changed recently, but close to 160,000 people across the country, sickened, or more than 5 million, or have killed more, about 160, more than 5 million have been sick. You have unemployed workers thinking about their jobs, benefits, things that are kind of going on there. Frontline workers being tied to the bone, being confronted with people with the virus itself. Our senior citizens being in isolation. Parents now have to become homeschoolers in addition to professionals. And then looking at kind of the average numbers a day with people just being killed from COVID. We just have this information overload and how we're being impacted. And I guarantee you, and I have felt this way, you have these feelings of hopelessness, being sad, worried, frustrated, being very intolerable. And if you have encountered things like you're not eating or sleeping enough, or you're eating and sleeping too much, having trouble focusing, feeling on edge or nervous about some of the things that are actually happening, short-tempered, arguing a lot, lack of motivation, unable to have these racing thoughts kind of calm your mind, or you find yourself withdrawing from others, you have pandemic fatigue. So let's get into some questions here. So I'm going to start with you first, Serena. The COVID numbers, obviously, we see are continuing to rise, and Americans are realizing that this pandemic is definitely far from over. What techniques have you personally used to help deal with pandemic fatigue?
Thank you, Claude. It's a really good question because I think that when this all started, several people said, well, I think we'll be back and out and going around June. I'm ready for that. I'm ready for a June return. And then as we had June hit and July hit, and now I have folks saying, I don't think we're going to be returning to any normalcy or whatever normal looks like until next year, 2021. I think pandemic fatigue really started to kick in because, one of the biggest issues is there's no end to it, or we don't know when there's going to be an end to it. So I wanted to share a couple things I've been doing. As part of my work, I go in and I do a lot of facilitation and teaching and team building for companies, employees, and leaders. And interestingly enough, one of the trends I've seen, certainly emotional intelligence is a popular topic right now, and it has been even prior to the pandemic. But there's two particular parts of emotional intelligence that I have seen become of great interest to leaders, professionals, and just people in general during the pandemic. And those two particular areas are, number one, stress tolerance. How do you manage your stress even when it comes in heightened amounts so that you can stay calm and clear? And another area of interest within emotional intelligence has been the ability to remain optimistic, or optimism, which is another sign of good emotional intelligence. So I've been teaching a lot on these two topics, particularly during the pandemic. And so I realized, okay, I need to take my own advice and I need to practice my own stress tolerance and my own optimism. And I really have thought a lot about what are the things that I'm doing in these two areas. And as it relates to stress tolerance, I feel like the best way we can handle the pandemic is trying to remain calm and trying to remain clear during this time of heightened stress. And we're not talking about one stressor. We're talking about people experiencing 2, 3, 4, 5 stressors at a time. We're talking about people who might be having furloughs, talking about people who are dealing with health issues, social isolation, etc. And so how do you maintain your calm and clarity during that time? And some of the things that I've been doing have been doing daily mindfulness and meditation. And I know it sounds like, well, that's pretty simple, or that's just sort of a trendy thing. But actually, the ability to stay calm depends a lot on my daily mindfulness practice. And so every day I do about 15 minutes of mindfulness and breathing. And I try to do 30 to 60-second breathing intervals throughout the day. And it keeps me in this low emotion state that allows me to handle the stress as it comes my way. Some other quick things, and you can also, the Calm app I know is really popular. You see ads for that all over the place. Your Fitbit allows you to also do mindfulness and meditation. I love this website called epicmeditations.com. There's some great quick meditations. I also make sure, as part of my good stress tolerance practice and keeping myself calm, I try to do my 10,000 steps a day. I know that sounds pretty simple, but even if it's around the house and doing ellipticals and things like that, that's really critical for me to keep a good physical headset by doing workout. I also use a QB, which I don't know if any of you have heard of, CUBII. We've been having, I think another pandemic fatigue issue has been people sitting too much and sitting for meetings and looking at the screen. And I actually have an under my desk elliptical so that my feet are moving at all times, and it actually keeps my legs working out and it keeps me not having back problems. So it's CUBII, and I love my QB. I use it all the time. I have a little mini elliptical, and if I allow myself a TV break, I've got to be on that mini elliptical while I'm watching TV. And then last but not least, a stand-up desk. I find that if I sit all day, which I think this pandemic has brought a lot of backaches for folks, it's no good. So I have my stand-up desk. The last quick thing I wanted to mention was about optimism, because I think that's really critical right now. And look, we have a lot of stress hitting us, a lot of reasons why we can feel sad, depressed, and really concerned. But I also like to keep my optimism at a healthy dose because it gives me perspective and reminds me that this is a point in history and a point in time. And I really like to use history to gain perspective. So I actually take a moment every week and look up some historical event that will give me insight and perspective about what's going on right now. And I've done research on things from the Spanish flu to World War I, World War II, even looking at life in the 1800s. And when I get frustrated with homeschooling and my son, all I have to do is look up schooling in the 1800s and realizing how difficult and hard it was. And I realized, wow, you know, we have so many pluses right now that our ancestors or people previous to us didn't have. I even like to look at historical figures like Anne Frank. Anne Frank is someone who was enclosed in a few rooms. She couldn't move all day. All she could move was at night, and she was really fearful that the Gestapo would potentially take her and her family away. I mean, these are people that are inspiring, give me strength, and really remind me, like Serena, no complaining. This too shall pass, and history reminds me that we're in a small point in time and it will pass as well. So those are a few things I do to help.
Awesome. I was furiously taking notes here. I think the thing that I have new goals, like 10,000 steps a day. I think over the last 5 months, I have not accumulated 10,000 steps just sitting in my desk. And I think that QB thing is awesome. I have to actually check that out. That is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I love my QB. It really helps.
That's awesome. So next time you see me, I'm going to have some videos of me doing a little QB. I don't know.
I love it. Go, Claude.
Well, you know, so we talk about pandemic fatigue. I think there are other types of fatigue that we know that we deal with. And James, I'm actually going to pitch this one to you because I've heard of this thing called Zoom fatigue. And although we know that video conferencing is something that is important for us to stay connected, especially from working from home, it can be draining. And, you know, why is that? And how can that be something that we can avoid?
Yeah, great question. First off, I want a little audience engagement. So if you've been feeling Zoom fatigue in the last week, could you please type in Zoom or yes, or however you want to express that as we're covering it. So a big reason is the cognitive load. So a lot of our feelings and attitudes are conveyed through dozens of nonverbal cues like gestures, postures, eye contact, and our brains automatically process them with minimal effort. Well, video calls dramatically impair this automatic processing ability and require sustained, intense attention. So this consumes a lot of energy and is exhausting. Magnify that by multiple people and suddenly your brain's looking for all of these cues and not actually getting feedback on it. There's a few other topics that I'd like to touch on within Zoom fatigue, the first of which is silence. And in normal conversations, it's great to have that natural rhythm and cadence, but when you go virtual, it can be very disruptive. Research has found that just a 1 second delay could make you come off as more distant, less friendly, or less focused, or worse, that the call's dropping and something's going wrong. Another factor is looking at ourselves. It's that whole notion that you've got a little square up top and it's impossible to not look at yourself and want to make sure that you're looking fine and you're looking ready. And the other sense of that is also the kind of social pressure of people observing. And it could very well just be someone's face, but if you're speaking to an audience with no feedback and flat facial expressions, that can be very challenging. And last of all, just a general sense of things that can go wrong. So I feel like it's very 2020 and there's nothing wrong with these things happening, but it's something like a dog barking, forgetting to go on mute, or having an unexpected visitor crash your meeting. So what can we do to mitigate and alleviate these issues? The first off is kind of avoiding multitasking and minimizing on-screen stimuli. So there's already enough going on. Maybe leave the YouTube video or whatever doc you're reviewing for a little bit later. Another one, it's kind of obvious, but we can turn off the video. We can opt for an audio only call, or I heard there are these things called phones that we can communicate through. And then the last thing I'd like to bring up are just building in breaks. So I know a lot of us are doing this already, but opting for a 25-minute meeting instead of half an hour, or 45 instead of 60 minutes, so we can have a bio break, get settled, and just really collect ourselves in between meetings so it doesn't feel like a relentless back to back to back to back.
Awesome, man. You know what was funny? When you had mentioned silence, and I don't know if it was intentional, but you paused literally for a second, I thought something was wrong.
That was by design. I hope I didn't
your design
cause you too much anxiety.
Yes, I did get a little worried there for a second. Well, thanks for that, man. Some great insights on that. I know I face Zoom fatigue, and I do a terrible job actually taking breaks. You know, I'm in back to back to back, and I just, you know, taking a 5-minute break or shorten the meeting and being a bit more disciplined is definitely something that I know I personally can improve on. So thanks for that. Elise, I have a question for you. Now, we talk about just COVID and information, because I do feel that it is important to get information, but there's just so much that we have. Do you have any recommendations on what we should be able to do to take in information without being overwhelmed by it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is, you know, Serena and I are both in the field of emotional intelligence, and a key competency of that is self-awareness. And I think we have to know how the news and scrolling through social media personally affects us. We're all going to be affected a little bit differently. And I think the goal is to be informed without being consumed. And if you're getting consumed and starting to experience feelings of anxiety, or depression or overwhelm, it's probably a sign that you need to limit the amount of time and put some boundaries around the time that you're spending on social media. And I think we're just all different. So, you know, somebody in your house, when they're seeing images that are a little disturbing, that's going to affect them the rest of the day. So we want to be mindful of even being on. Do we watch it visually? Do we just listen to the radio? Maybe even finding the source of news that you find allows you to feel informed without having an overwhelm of those feelings that I described. So I think it's knowing yourself well and making decisions that help protect that for you. So the goal being informed but not consumed. And then I would just be mindful of how the information around COVID-19 is infiltrating other parts of your life, and really guarding your heart and guarding your mind. So when you're watching TV, you know, maybe you're balancing the news with other fun comedies, lighthearted entertainment, that the only time the TV doesn't come on is when you're watching the news. Another is that when you get together with friends and family is, you know, maybe limit how much time you're spending talking about all your concerns and worries about COVID-19. You know, part of the joy of together and being able to be sitting outside right now is that you can get together and not talk about that and have a little bit of a break, unless you're getting support, of course, and you find that supportive, of course. But in general, to use your time with your friends and family to maybe not be talking about COVID. I think another thing is keeping gratitude front of mind. As Serena already said, sometimes when we have tunnel vision about our present circumstances, we forget about all the things there are to be grateful for. And I think it's looking at our thought life and saying, am I in imbalance? Am I having more negative outweighing the positive thoughts? And if that's the case, I need to get into a balance where the positive is outweighing the negative so that I can stay in a good headspace. And, so much of my job is training up leaders. And if you want to be a leader or an influencer, it's up to you to really model what it looks like to have realistic optimism during this time. And Sri mentioned that a emotional intelligent competency is optimism, and realistic optimism means we're not denying what's happening. We're even maybe empathizing with people around the struggle, but we're not letting ourselves park there. We choose to be future focused. We understand that lots of people, you look at the Great Depression and other events, as was mentioned before, and you see that they had a start and a stop time. We also see that unexpected good things have come out of this time, so we anticipate the good things with expectation. And, Serena mentioned meditation as a practice. If you're somebody who prays, prayer is really helpful because it's a way of letting go and realizing the responsibility for things doesn't all rest on your shoulders. So I would say that these are some ways that you can put some boundaries around your consumption of the news and all of that while still staying informed.
Yeah, I love it. I took two things that I thought were important. You had mentioned boundaries, which I think is great, but informed and not consumed, and guard your heart and your mind. And I think these are two important things. Usually when I watch a really scary movie, yes, I get scared. Or something that's very sensitive, I tend to watch something upbeat, and I can completely see, if you're inundated with, COVID news and all this stuff, going to bed with that, I could see that sense of worry and a lot of that stuff. So love the advice here. Thank you for that, Elise. All right. So we're going on to our next theme, people fed up with being locked up. Now, I thought this image was just so relevant because this is what I feel I want to do to the virus and just eradicate it. So have any of you ever felt this way? I feel like I want to live at work. I just want to get away. I miss going out. I'm stuck in the house all the time. Just the frustration, you can see it on their face, how they feel. And, when we think about being quarantined, there is some psychological damage that happens sort of longer term. And here's just some 4 points, and see if any of these things resonate with you. Having your normal routine disrupted, feeling bored, not physically moving. I need to get my 10,000 steps, reducing or virtually eliminating any sort of physical activity at all. Have you found yourself being in this particular situation, just being quarantined, being isolated? And there's an interesting fact, which I did not know. Isolation is lethal. So according to research, there's a study that was done by the National Center of Biotechnology Information, that people that don't have very strong social relationships or kept in isolation are 50% more likely to die prematurely than those that have more a healthy social network or just kind of interacting with others. That is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes per day. And they talk about being that lethal. And I did not believe this. I was reading that stat and I found multiple references and ended up finding on the study. But that's crazy when you think about isolation and us needing to be around folks. So let's see, part 2 of the question. So I know that I have personally felt isolated and trapped at home during the quarantine mandates. And it is very easy to get a negative space. And for me, going on 5 months or so, there are negative thoughts that I see that are going on. So Serena, I'm going to pitch this one over to you. What are some of the things that we can do not to feel socially isolated during quarantine?
Yeah, I think this is a really important and interesting point, Claude, and I want to mention a little nuance to isolation. I do a lot of work with the Myers-Briggs. I have for the last 20 plus years, and so my friends and family all know that I'm always talking type and personality style, and one of the things I have found to be an interesting element to isolation is it also depends on what your personality preference is. as far as your need for being with people and your need for isolation, and your need to have that downtime, extroverts and introverts, those with a preference for extroversion and those for a preference with a preference for introversion, react, I think, a little differently to isolation. I'm the extrovert in my household, and I live with two men, my husband and my son, who are both introverts. My son, when virtual learning happened last March, gave me a high five and said, "Yes, Mom, being in a classroom with 30 kids was really overwhelming all the time." And he's like, "I really like having a little more of my personal space to myself." So for him, having a little more downtime one-on-one for himself and having it be sort of socially sanctioned was a gift to him. For myself, I really missed the social interaction because my need for the energy that I riff off of people was just at a different level than he was. Now, with that being said, everybody still needs to connect with people. But I just think it's important for you to think about, when it comes to isolation, what level of connection do you want and need from people? And it's okay if you don't feel like you want a lot, and it's okay if you feel like you want more. So that's just a first point I wanted to mention. But I wanted to bring up a couple things that I've either heard people do in the workplace or personally, and some of these things you might already be doing. But before I say that, before I share that, the other thing I wanted to say is that I don't know that there's anything that's going to replace in-person connection for folks. And so I think we also just have to realize that right now are extraordinary circumstances, and we're not going to feel the same way we did back in January or, you know, last year. But there are some things that you can do. And just to bring up a couple of fun ones that I've heard people doing or I've done is you can do weekly lunch dates with coworkers, get on Zoom with someone, grab a bite to eat with them for a half an hour at a time or an hour, grab a coffee. I have someone who I work with, and she and I probably every 2 weeks try to schedule a Zoom coffee date so we can talk about work. We do like to look at each other, but sometimes we'll say, "Hey, let's do this one by phone," mentioning the Zoom fatigue that James was talking about. Also, you can play online games with folks. There's a ton of online games, and I know a few people who are doing that. Scrabble Go is an awesome one. Plus, there's a bunch of other ones too, but playing games with folks is a way to stay connected with them. A lot of people are doing, and many of you may have done this, but happy hours or dinner meetups with people via Zoom. I've even had close friends who have said, "That sounds hideous. I do not want to do a Zoom meeting with my friends for dinner," and then did it and realized, wow, it was actually more fun than I thought. And I didn't realize how much I missed people until we did that. So you might surprise yourself. People are also doing yoga and fitness classes through streaming. So that's a way to stay connected with folks. I've had several friends and colleagues tell me that they feel more connected to some of their friends now than they did before, because they're actually taking the time to make phone calls to people and to reach out to people. Whereas when life was busy and the hubbub of running around and doing a million things, they just didn't make time for it. So I've had some people say they actually feel more connected with folks than they had been prior. Even simple things like walks around the neighborhood. You might not be talking to everyone, but just walking around the neighborhood. I've had several people say, "Serena, this sounds funny, but going to the grocery store has become a whole new social event for me." Like, they just like being out with people, and going grocery shopping is something that connects us to each other. And I also have known folks who have, depending on how your neighborhood is set up, maybe talked with neighbors, set up tables in one neighbor's yard, and then had a neighbor next door, and then sort of talked across the yards to each other. I'm talking about all of the sort of or socially sanctioned connects. Now, depending on your particular neighborhood, you might have a different, depending on what your safety or risk level is, you might be going to dinner on patios and connecting with people. I know people who are going camping right now who are out in nature. So there's sort of a gamut of things, but hopefully some of those online things or, quick things you can do in your neighborhood would help all of us feel a little less isolated.
Yeah, this is great. And I really appreciate you just addressing the isolation fact. That is an important piece. And so, the idea that there are different personality types, people do handle things differently, and how they connect with people, that is such an important piece as well. So thank you for addressing that with the group.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Glad.
Elise, some of us are spending a lot of time with significant others and children. What advice do you have so that we're not at each other's throats all the time? It's just kind of taking care of our relationship to making sure that, it's still being nurtured.
Yep, this is a great one. So I think the first thing it's important to remember is that relationships are a gift. There's a lot of people who don't have family. There's a lot of people who don't have friends. And I think sometimes it's important to remember that if we have family, we have a friends, those are gifts to be kind of stewarded well. That just helps us remember how important that they are. And also, if you know people, even in your neighborhood or family members or anyone you know that is more isolated, is to make an effort to really reach out, to invite them over if in the backyard or whatever it is that are the restrictions that work best for your situation. They're a gift. The other thing is if you've got parents in a home with children, I know that's a whole new ball game. And so, the health of a family is based on the health of the marriage. And so being able to take time out with your spouse or significant other to be able to have time where you're just focused on enjoying one another's company and building intimacy into the relationship is really important. And I know that can look really different for people, but there's really simple ways from, getting a box of fun questions and sitting out in the backyard and, asking each other some fun questions. We've gotten, like in and out and had a picnic in the back of our car overlooking the beach and watching the sunset. We've had sushi in our front yard and watched the sunset. If you have kids, maybe it's waiting till after they go to bed and watching a movie together and having your favorite snack. Just taking time out for one another, and even having COVID talk is off limits when you have this time. So the two requirements are maybe fun and romance, just those two things. And that can really take the pressure off. Also, if you're working at home with kids, is finding a rhythm with your spouse that works. Now, I don't have kids yet, but my sister does. She has 2 kids. They both own their own businesses and they both work from home and they're both homeschooling 2 kids. And I've just watched her walk through it and all of our friends who have kids, and what seems like a really good rhythm for them, and maybe this can inspire others, is to create time blocks throughout the day where one parent is with the kids wholeheartedly and entertaining them and keeping an eye on them while one works, and they do a switch. And even if that's just 90-minute increments of switching all day so that you're not too long away from work, or somebody's not with the kids for too long of a stretch, but finding a rhythm that works for your family so that you're both feeling like you're getting work done, and also, of course, the kids are being taken care of. And then I love to protect the weekends and let Saturdays and Sundays be days of play and rest. So if you're working really hard during the week, that one of those days is a day of play. Let's get a change of scenery. I know at the beginning of COVID, we couldn't go out and do all the outdoorsy things we love to do. So my husband and I would just take a drive along the coast with our favorite 80s music playing so that we could just have a change of scenery. It feels like Groundhog Day sometimes, waking up and doing the same thing day after day. Having a change of scenery can really allow you to reset. And then a day of rest, a day where you're not doing laundry, you're not doing any of that. You're just resting. Maybe you're watching a movie together, or watching sports with no audiences during this time. Whatever it is great. And then something I love is making it a priority to eat dinner together. So many families pre-COVID weren't able to eat dinner together, and they were on opposite schedules, and they were like ships passing in the night. Why not really make it a tradition during this time to have dinner together? And what if every night the tradition was you say something you love and appreciate about each person around the table? So I think it's, they have that saying, familiarity breeds contempt. So I think what's important is to let the familiarity be mixed up with some variety. And I think that some of those things are ways that you can do that.
Yeah, I love familiarity with some variety, and I love relationships as a gift. So two nice takeaways there. All righty. Theme number 3. Does flexibility of working from home also cause burnout? So there was a study done by, or at least a survey done by the State of Remote Work by Buffer, And from that study, 98% of people that were surveyed said that if they had the option to work from home, they would do it for the rest of their careers. And, you know, I would enjoy working from home, you know, get to be my sweatpants, you know, flexible schedules, time with family, work from any location, you know, you don't have to worry about commute. I don't know how much money I've saved on gas. And, you know, you can probably come up with a whole bunch of different other benefits that might exist. Now, it seems like it's perfect, but it's not, because we know that there are some struggles that we've all faced, at least on this call, that we've dealt with. And it's really kind of boils down to that blur between, you know, work and personal life, where it's difficult to unplug. You know, distractions that might be at home. How do you continue to stay motivated? So there are all these things that we know that we do struggle with. Now, in addition to that, there's this idea of burnout. And, you know, with burnout, you know, being either physically or mentally, you know, have physical mental collapse, and it's caused by, you know, just overwork, right? And then the effort to continue to do better, you end up just ruining your ability to work at all. And I will tell you that probably over the last month, I've experienced burnout. I felt like I had no control at work. You know, problems in my social life, just kind of balancing, you know, my friends and even, you know, with my wife at home, you know, not so much boredom at work, but just the chaotic nature of having to manage everything, and just this constant workload where I'm constantly always online all the time. And there was this funny survey not a funny survey, but a survey that they had done, you know, along with this. And the thing that I thought was interesting is that 7 out of 10 people had contact with burnout, meaning that they had it, but then they didn't take it too seriously. You know, so 8 out of 10 people said, hey, I have this, but it's not that big of a deal. And when I started looking at, well, how serious is burnout and what's actually going on, I found this article that talked about, as of May 2019, burnout was officially recognized by WHO and the International Classification of Disease as an occupational phenomenon, with the possibility of being proclaimed as a proper disease in the future. Now, Elise, I don't know if, or Elise or Serena, I don't know if you're going to come back and correct me on this one, but I found this reference here, and I just thought this was so interesting. So the question that, you know, I'll pitch this one to you, Elise, to start off with. So working from home comes with some perks, which we know, but there's some challenges as well. So those challenges being that not all homes are equally suited for, you know, working from home, having a home office, effects of just changing schedules, especially with those parents that now have to be, you know, taking care of their kids and probably other things, and just mental health problems that might arise from some of the things that we've talked about. So from a company perspective, which do you feel is most important for businesses to have to address, and why?
And I don't know if this is a trick question, but I would say all of the above. I think that businesses have to be mindful of all of the above, because any one of their employees could be dealing with all or one of them. You know, when you think about the important considerations that businesses need to have, when we look at effects on changing schedules, you know, businesses are going to have to exercise a little grace and flexibility. Maybe being used to just being able to walk down to somebody's cubicle or office and being able to ask them a question. And then now we're in COVID and you have to try to nail down when somebody's available to talk to them. It's not as convenient. But there's ways around that. I'll be talking about that a little bit later. But I think that businesses have to have a certain level of grace and flexibility. Obviously, on the other side, employees have to start developing rhythms that are predictable so that their bosses have something that they can respond to. So I think that's really important. I think there has to be good communication. I think that can bridge a lot of gaps that COVID's creating around changing work schedules. Because if you have communication, then we're good. It's when, you know, somebody has a deadline, there's no communication, they don't know when they're going to be able to get a hold of somebody, and then there's all this unnecessary stress. So I'd say, if anything, during this time, both sides have to be good communicators. And then for the mental health issues, you know, a lot of them seem to be related to isolation and loneliness. And Serena already did such a good job in talking about some ways that technology can be used to really bring a sense of socialization and community during this. And I've seen with the clients that I coach, when I'm kind of asking what they're doing during this time to really keep people engaged. And especially those people, you have young millennials that usually have roommates and they don't really have family. And also they, sometimes because they're newer in their career, they need a bit more direction than maybe somebody who's seasoned. So those are some considerations. But overall, to be able to facilitate as a company, some of the things that you might have thought were reserved for somebody's personal choices outside of work. You might have thought, well, it's their job to find friends, or it's their job to socialize, or it's their job to do all these things. But we have to remember that the health of an individual affects the health of the team and the organization. And so we as leaders and as business owners and people that are leading others, we have to create atmospheres where people can have those things available to them, because it's going to allow them not only to show up better for themselves, but also for the organization. So the things that, Serena mentioned, like happy hour, lunches together, there's all sorts of fun games. You can do like bingo and print out your sheet and somebody calls bingo, and then whoever wins, like DoorDash gets delivered to their door for lunch or something like that. That's a really fun one. Also, leaders need to know their people. And as Serena said already, people are wired differently, and it's being tuned in to the impact that this is having on different individuals. So maybe that maybe there's 10 people on your team, and that 8 of them are fine, but 2 of them probably aren't. Those are the people to really reach out to. Those are the people to make sure they have what they need. Those are the people maybe you just spend 20 minutes just talking casually, not even about work, just to check in and see how they're doing. But I think these are all equal considerations. Not everybody, to the last point, suited for work. Again, that's going to have to be something that businesses are somewhat flexible about, because that's not always in people's control. As things start to open up, and even outside in coffee shops, you can go there now, things like that, depending on your area. But I think all of these are equal considerations, and businesses are going to retain their best people if they keep an eye on these things during this time.
Yeah, that is a great point. And some of the things that I took away from what you had mentioned was around just the proactiveness, that businesses just can't rely on, the employees or the individuals, doing it, because like you said, everyone has different personalities and what's going on. And what a great way for businesses or a manager or leader just to show that they care by just being in touch, by being more empathetic with that flexibility or communicating and creating pathways to sort of help out. So excellent. And I appreciate you addressing all 3 points on that one. Let's see, Serena, I've heard employees say that they love working from home, or they would love to work from home. However, there is a negative perception that some companies might have and how it might impact their professional career. So a couple of these reasons include that remote workers need to prove that they're actually working because they're off playing video games all day. Or remote workers are available all day for work. They don't need a break, that they're that home they can actually do more. Or that remote workers are actually lazy, which seems to be an oxymoron between the last one. But, do you feel that these biases are true? If not, how can these perceptions be addressed or changed or managed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think these perceptions have been around for a long time around remote workers prior to the pandemic. But what I think the pandemic has done is actually to help companies change these biases, because we all know that several companies have said for years, we cannot have people working from home. But when, necessity occurs and you need to innovate and you need to do remote working, everybody has shown up and work has gone on. And some work environments have actually been even more productive with people working from home and saving money, et cetera. But with that being said, you could still have these biases occur, particularly based on your management, your work culture. Some of this could be externally driven if you have a work culture that still believes these things. I know there's been some workplaces that have actually called people back in because they've been concerned about this. So what I would like to say from an individual's perspective of how can you combat this, I think the first thing you want to do is you want to assess your work environment. If this is a cultural issue and the work environment is such that they don't promote working from home, whether it's a pandemic or not, you really have to decide, is this the right work environment for me? Is this something that is so important to me that I need to really assess if this is a good fit? So that's sort of one bigger issue. But from a personal perspective, I really think this is an opportunity from a career counseling perspective to manage your career even more effectively. I've had some people say to me, I get so busy, or what I've noticed rather, let me just say it this way. What I've noticed is people will get so busy working in their job that they forget to work on their career. So if you're worried about proving your value as a worker and that bias, one of the things I often recommend from a career perspective is if you're producing and creating, which I'm assuming we all are, then you can't just keep your head down and do it and hope someone notices it. Make sure that you're tracking your deliverables, demonstrating your value, that you're noting your work results and your wins, and you're communicating it to your leadership, and you're communicating it to your stakeholders in the company. You can communicate it in a way that's not arrogant. You can communicate it in a more matter-of-fact way, in a way of being of service. And by you communicating it, whether it's through your one-on-ones or a weekly email highlighting a work update or a work recap, you're starting to really make sure you're proving your value. And I would say you should be doing that whether it's a pandemic or not, whether you're working from home or not. I've seen so many folks who get into that vibe of just working that they forget to mention some of the good things that they're doing as a way of showing that they're productive, showing the value that they're bringing to the workplace. And particularly during a pandemic, when companies are looking for ways to downsize or right size or having budget issues, you want to be a high producer. You need to make it, you need to tell people around you. So again, quick, easy one-on-one discussions or recaps or emails are really great ways to make sure you're keeping that in front of people at all times. The other issue that you mentioned, Claude, was being available all day and all night. And I think if that's a concern for someone, you need to first evaluate it. Is that internally or externally driven? First of all, you could have an environment where you have a leader or a corporate culture that requires you to be on 24/7. Or what I've seen more often in private clients I've worked with is that they are driven to be available 24/7. They are driven to constantly check their email, constantly be looking at their phones, answer emails 24/7 just because they feel like, look, I need to be on top of it. I can't step away. I'm having a tough time with work-life balance. So I think you first need to evaluate where is that coming from, number one. And the other thing that, I often talk about in these kinds of discussions with clients is I'll say to them, try some of the tips of having a make sure that you calendar off, even if you're having just lunch, but you feel like it's more socially sanctioned to say you're in a meeting, put little meeting invites or meeting holders on your calendar where you just take a moment to take a deep breath, or maybe you have work time. I know on my calendar, I schedule out work time and I really try not to compromise that. So the question starts to become when I'm working with someone or talking to someone is that, are you compromising it? And are you making yourself available all the time? And if you're not respecting or having enough discipline to respect your time, then nobody else is going to respect it. And if you're burned out and tired, you're not going to be the superstar that you want to be at work. So I would say that that's also something that has to be internally driven by most people that I speak with. I would say if you're doing those things, then you're not going to be considered lazy at work. And if you're still being considered lazy at work and you're doing all that great stuff, then again, you need to probably reevaluate the culture and see if it's a right fit for you.
Excellent. I loved when you said so busy working on your job that you forget to work on your career. And I found myself doing that even to this day. Like I find myself so heads down that I look up and like, what have I done to really enhance, myself personally and sort of what I'm doing at the job, and articulating, the value that I'm providing to the organization. The best person to kind of take care of you, especially a big corporate company, is you.
Absolutely. And Claude, I think these black swan events, whether it's this pandemic or it was the recession of 08 or 09, have been critical periods in people's careers where they stop and say, I'm never going to do that again, because when the rubber hit the road and I needed to find work or I needed to make sure that I was being of value, I was sort of stuck because I hadn't been doing anything to take care of my career. And doing your job daily isn't enough. You've got to do more than that. So absolutely.
Great advice. Oh man, love it. James, so questions for you, man. So, we took a look at a little bit about, sort of working from home, some of the challenges that we face. We're looking at burnout and what that means. So I think it's easy to say there is some correlation in how they relate to one another. We did see how, there's this line that blurs between work and personal life. Do you feel that with all the social mandates and everything that we have going on right now, that we can prevent this? And if so, how?
Great question. I may just be an idealist and optimist by nature, but I feel like there are definitely things that are within our control. So just kind of touching on the blurred lines a little bit, I feel like the physical space is something that's really challenging, especially here in San Diego, where real estate isn't the cheapest. For a lot of folks, our homes have become our offices, or it feels like we're living in our workplace. And if you feel that way, I'd love to see it in the chat, or if you don't, please let us know your secrets. Because even if you've been working remotely before, there's this whole notion that there's no longer a hard boundary or cutoff time. And moreover, the nature of work has changed. I know our friends over at Intuit who manage TurboTax, the federal tax deadline changed, and just imagine all the planning that's thrown off in these accelerated deadlines. The other component of this work-life balance is kind of mental models and this notion of overconsumption and satiation. So we're at our desks, we touched on Zoom fatigue, we touched on answering emails and chatting all day. So even when it comes time to do that in a social setting, like connecting with friends, you can feel like, oh, I don't really want to do this. Things like watching Netflix or playing video games have even lost their shine a little bit. So as far as things we can do, just have some kind of simple tips. First off is just drawing the boundary. And I feel like this is important in all of our lives, pandemic or not, and just knowing when to say no and clearly communicating your needs when you need time off or time that's strictly just for a work block. And then declining invitations. Benjamin in the chat mentioned that it's kind of interesting that more folks don't say no to virtual happy hours, and it's kind of easy to forget that that decline option on a calendar invite exists. Another concept I like to think about is this whole notion of reintroducing serendipity. In our previous lives, no matter how introverted or extroverted we were, there was just so much more stimulation externally with the folks we meet in our daily activities, and that's really come to a stop. So just thinking about what are fun things that you can do to introduce that serendipity back in, and we already discussed a lot of those, like having amazing meals at home or cooking. There's also comedy shows and music performances through Zoom now. And while it might not be the same, I think it's very, very engaging experience compared to just being on a regular meeting or watching something pre-recorded or static. And then Airbnb experiences, you can do cooking classes and travel virtually. So if anyone has great tips on interesting virtual events they've done, would love to see that. And then lastly, this whole notion of staying in touch with others. It sounds so simple, but I read a Medium article, and it was by this lumberjack living in the forest. And he was talking about, he had always thought of himself as a man's man. And if and when an apocalypse came, his ability to fend for himself and forage would be what saved his life. But what it turned out to be is just the ability to pick up a phone and send a text or make a phone call. So John mentioned it in chat that perhaps the term physical distancing might be more appropriate than social distance, because while we might not be able to interact together, we can certainly still be social.
Yeah, no, this was great insights. Setting up boundaries, not setting up boundaries for yourself, definitely important. I love what John said about the physical distancing aspect. That is great insight. I like the way that was framed. Just making a little note here on that. Thank you, James, for that. Very insightful. All righty. Flexible working. So not every company has embraced this concept of flexible working. And let's take a look at why. So there are managers that are worried, and I've talked to some about the productivity and the focus of teams, that at least the productivity will diminish if people aren't working in the same physical location. And so some of the top concerns that have come up, and I'm not going to read through all these, but let's see here. Reduce employee productivity. How do you help maintain a company culture? There's employees overworking. So you could see some of the concerns here that managers have. And, Elise, I'm going to pitch this one over to you. What steps can leaders take or use to address concerns about team productivity, maintaining a healthy company culture while working virtually? And do you see, I guess 2 parts here, do you see that EQ plays an important factor in addressing this?
Yeah, EQ plays a factor in everything. Mostly because it's a relationship building skill, and we're in relationship in every area of our lives. So it's going to come into play all the time. I won't park on this one too much because I kind of already covered it before, but the need for increased communication. Again, during this time, an increase in communication is really important. The other is finding a rhythm as a leader between leading others. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you have to be available to others because you lead them. They're going to need access to you to ask questions. You're going to need to have team meetings and all of that. But it's really helpful as a leader if you segment out your time. So if you say all of my meetings, if possible, are going to be scheduled until noon with other people. That way you can take the afternoon as a leader to actually get your own work done. Because what I found with a lot of leaders is they feel like they need to be accessible all the time, but then they're getting constantly interrupted, and it's causing them to stress out about the work that they need to get done. So then they're not really present for people that need their help because they're feeling stressed. So one of the things that seems to work for a lot of people is to segment out your time. It doesn't really matter when it is. It's just that we're going to get as many consolidated meetings on the calendar in the morning, and plenty of opportunities for people to ask questions or get what they need. Afternoon, it's almost like closed office hours where the leader is, unless it's an emergency, people know that that's when they're trying to get their work done. That seems to have really helped a lot of leaders that I know. The other is just as leaders, we have the opportunity to lead by example. And I've kind of touched on this already around realistic optimism, but just this idea that we can acknowledge the hardship that's going on, but we also have to have a vision towards the future. And it's all in our language. We can choose to say this is a problem or this is an opportunity. We can say this is a crisis or we can say this is a situation. We have to realize that life and death is in the power of the tongue. So are we speaking life or are we speaking death over people? Our language can really shape the way that we change atmospheres as leaders. As leaders, I always think like we walk into an environment, it's almost like there's a thermostat. And as the leaders, we get to push the thermostat at what temperature things are going to be at. And we have that influence. And so then that can create an environment and a culture where people follow suit instead of being the person stressed out and having that be a domino effect. Another huge thing I think is showing empathy. And empathy is really misunderstood, but it's one of the most underused, and yet I call it a superpower of emotional intelligence, because empathy is really about making a connection with somebody else. And you don't have to understand what somebody's going through. You don't have to relate to it. You don't have to have gone through the same circumstance yourself. But what you're doing is you're acknowledging and seeing and hearing that person, and providing an opportunity for them not to feel alone in it. I think a lot of times people feel so alone and they're sharing something because they don't want to feel alone about it. And so if you want to look up a great resource for empathy, Brene Brown has a video on empathy. You can just YouTube it, empathy animation, Brene Brown, and you'll see that she really breaks it down in just a really tangible way, really easy to understand way. And basically what she says is, we have a tendency with empathy to want to fix or to want to give advice. We also have a tendency to want to say at least and put a silver lining around something in a moment where somebody just needs to be validated of where they're at. So the tricky part about that is that sometimes we care a lot, but we just don't know what to say. So one of the resources I'm giving to everybody that's on the call today is 7 empathy hacks, what to say when you don't know what to say. And it can give you some ways of really showing empathy to somebody and making a connection with them. So I would say those are the primary things that can continue to keep a team productive and maintain a healthy company culture. You know, I was just consulting an engineering firm last week, their HR director, and their biggest concern right now is we don't know what the future holds. So how do we know whether to keep people? How do we know whether to hire people? They had some interns and their time's coming to an end. How do they know whether to hire those people? And there's no easy answer to that. But what I would say during this time to protect company culture that's also important is to not burn any bridges with people. Because let's say you do have to let somebody go, but then 6 months later, you're able to hire them back. Make sure you handle all that with a lot of care so that they want to come back. That can actually give you a little bit of security knowing, okay, I'm making the best call I can right now. And obviously, if I would need to bring somebody back, I'm in good standing in that relationship. So I think it's important to keep our relationships in good standing with everybody that we're working with, because we're so dependent on each other during this time.
Yeah, I think it was just so spot on about how language can definitely shape an environment. I don't know how many times that I've mistakenly used a word that I didn't intend to, and how that just completely changed the dynamic of the room. And you know, sometimes it's hard to kind of take some of that stuff back, you know, now that it's out there, you know, for everyone to hear. So definitely, you know, slowing down and, you know, prepping and understanding what you say and how you say it, I think is extremely important. So thanks for that one. James, design thinking, you know, I'm going to pull on your little UX background here, man. So design thinking is a unique, you know, form of problem solving. And so for those that don't know, there's 5 stages: empathy, or empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Hopefully I got those right. How can design thinking be used to address these company concerns?
Yeah, you nailed the steps, Claude. Thank you for that. And the reason us UXers and designers love design thinking so much is that it gets to the core of people's needs, what they truly need, not just what they want. And from there, you can ideate just incredible, even wild solutions, build a low-cost prototype, get it in front of folks and have them using it instead of just asking, hey, would you like this? Would you use it? Evaluate it and then iterate. So from a business perspective and a product perspective, it reduces costs and risk and it improves outcomes. So just so powerful when you can ground solutions in empathy and human centricity rather than jumping into solutions based off assumptions on what we think people want. So one little example locally that I love here in San Diego is a lot of the distilleries and brewers leveraging their existing equipment to produce hand sanitizer, something that we really, really need. And just to continue riffing on the service industry, because it's so prominent here, did anyone go to a restaurant when they were reopened or has been to a patio restaurant? It's incredible what places are doing. Din Tai Fung, the dumpling restaurant in UTC, has this nearly all mobile experience where you come in, scan a QR code, you can see the menu through your phone, pay through your phone, everything's touchless and contactless. So design thinking can really help us innovate and create interesting solutions like that. And on a larger scale, I'm sure you've all seen home fitness has taken off. Really interesting fields like child education, entertainment, people have been finding very, very interesting ways. So it's a super simple framework that anyone can apply to ideate some interesting new solutions and then test them.
Nice. I love it. Yeah, there's so many things. I think innovation comes like during these times, right? Like we have to be forced to think about new ways of working. And before you know it, it'll be interesting to see how many major startups come out of this pandemic. All right, we are wrapping up on our last question here. So I appreciate everyone staying on board, and hopefully you didn't get Zoom fatigue with this meeting and it was engaging and fun. But our last theme here is a view into a post-COVID world. So as the world continues to deal with everything that we've been dealing with COVID-19, it seems like every part of society has been impacted by this in some form or fashion. So there's a lot of fears that are actually growing. Economy's health, the changes that we see into our life, and how everything works. There was a study done or survey done by 347 risk analysts, and they ranked the likelihood of major risks that would happen after this whole thing with the pandemic. And so looking at about a year and a half, post the pandemic. So these were 31 risk that popped up, and this was based on economic, social, geopolitical, technical and environmental. And so just looking at the first top 10, I think about 70% is about the economy, but just kind of look at some of this, the recession, unemployment, another outbreak happening, weakening the economy. You can sort of read through here. So, what I'd like to do is kind of ask two questions to my panelists. So the first question that I'm going to ask, if you were to look at, this list or maybe something outside of this list, what do you think most likely will happen, after this post this pandemic? And if you have any thoughts on how we could maybe prevent it or address it. So out of this list. And the second part of that question after we go through this is, do we see that there could be any silver linings? A lot of it is kind of focused on the negativity, and we heard Serena and Elisa talk about, having that positive mindset and not be pandemic focused 100% of the time. There has to be some silver linings that are coming out of this. So two-part question. Let's start with Serena first.
Sorry, I had to get myself off mute. Thanks, Claude. I wanted to talk about two particular. Well, let me start actually with the concerns for the world. What's going on? The one that I am really closely affiliated with is high unemployment, because as a career counselor, I certainly do a lot of corporate training and things of that nature, but I also do a lot of career work as well. And I think that with high unemployment, I think we may find that number staying high for a while. And so while we may not necessarily be able to control what's going on in industry or with large companies, or companies being reserved about whether they're going to hire or if they're going to have to lay off or fire, I do think there are some things that individuals can do. We were at a great unemployment rate prior to COVID. We were at 3.3%, which is the lowest it's been since the 1960s, and we're now at 14.9%. And so what I'm finding, a lot of professionals and clients I'm working with, private clients, are really concerned about how, I either need to find a job because I've lost my job, I'm furloughed, and I need to just make sure I've got additional work, or I was let go from my job. Or I've also seen a lot of people who have been using this opportunity to really rethink their career and say, what do I really want to do? And so they're on the job market as well. And so I just wanted to say, it feels, I think, a little bleak, and it may feel bleak for a while, but there are some things that we as individuals can do during the pandemic, job search wise. And I also want to bring up an interesting stat that I was looking at. Indeed.com is still putting up 9.8 new jobs every second, and that was of July 27th. So 2020. So while there is work that is not happening right now, there is work that is happening right now. So if you are in a situation and you're looking for work and you're unemployed, what I'm really talking to a lot of people about right now, whether it's in training or individually, is that you have to go above and beyond. Applying for the job is not enough. It is just sort of the baseline thing to be doing. And it kind of goes back to that comment I made earlier. Don't get so busy working in your job that you forget to work on your career, because when it comes to times of high unemployment, you realize, wow, I'm behind the curve in building the reputation I've wanted to build, or in really making sure that I'm well known within my industry, or making sure that I have the right contacts that if I am in an unemployment situation, I can pick up the phone and have some people to connect with. So one of the things that you all can get access to at the end is one of my favorite tools, which is a career resilience quiz. And you might want to just use it to test yourself and see how active are you being in your career management. So whether it's a pandemic or something else, that you're ready and prepared if you need to switch gears. So a quick couple of things that I tell people to do is, if you apply for that job, let's just say you apply for something on LinkedIn, that's just step one. You know, there's a good 3 things that you can do after that, just quickly, would be check your alumni association and make sure, you know, a lot of universities will give you access to your alumni database and see who works where. And if you have somebody who's from your alumni university working in the organization you're applying to, send your resume through that route, get on the phone and have a chat with that person about the environment, the culture, and make that connection. You can also find out some of the alumni through LinkedIn. I also tell folks to connect directly with the hiring managers and HR of that company, not just with Indeed, but go on LinkedIn, look up the company, look up hiring managers. I was just working with a client recently who was applying for a company. We did a quick search on LinkedIn. He found the hiring manager for that area. I said, send them a quick note and make that connect. Be bold. Right now is the time to be bold. Do not step back and hide your resume and just give it out and that's it. And then the third thing, which I've been talking to people about a lot lately in the job market, is don't just be a consumer of content, create content. And what I mean by that is, everybody on this call is probably doing something very interesting in your work. And the problem is that you're so close to it, you forget about how interesting it is to everybody else. So I always like to recommend, pick that one thing. There was somebody I was working with recently who had been doing some research on workplace harassment. And I said, great, why don't you start a blog about workplace harassment, the research you found, tips for folks, and then put that blog address right on the top of your resume. And I'm telling you, people are going to be paying attention to you more than the 100 other people who are just skating by with the bare minimum. So this is something I tell my son constantly, and he's a teenager and doesn't always like to hear it, but I tell him anyway. It's just stand out and go above and beyond. The people that are getting work, that are finding success in the job market, are the ones that are going above and beyond. So that's just a quick thought around that. And then one last thing, and I want to, and I won't take long on this, with regards to silver linings. You know, I have to say, with regards to this pandemic, I'm sure like many of you on this call, I'm a busy professional, and I found that prior to the pandemic, like for many of us, I'm overscheduled and overbooked with activities, things to do, stuff that I'm doing. And one of the silver linings I have found with the pandemic has been some sanctioned downtime. Like there's actually no question, if I want to sit at home and binge Netflix all day, eating ice cream and never get off my couch. And I have to tell you, as naughty as that sounds, I really wish I did it a little bit more than I do. And so I have found that the silver lining of the pandemic for me has been to sort of force me to get off the hamster wheel and take a little more downtime for myself, with family, friends, making phone calls, things like that. Now look, everybody's got a different situation, and I know we talked about social isolation earlier, but for those of you on the call that are just constantly busy, I'm wondering if you're finding that that sanctioned downtime has been a welcome relief for you as well. And I'm trying to enjoy it and maybe integrate a little bit of it into my life, even post-pandemic. So that's a silver lining that I just wanted to mention.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Elise, do you have anything to add, or comments on one of the concerns?
Serena did such a good job. So I'll just highlight a couple things. I think any of these things could happen, and probably depending on what situation you find yourself in, one of these is going to be more of a concern to you than another one. And I think something that can be helpful is to think of, what can I do around whatever my biggest concern is. I think stress comes from trying to control things that we can't. And so what we want to do is, one of my favorite exercises for stress management is, you know, whatever you're concerned about, make a list of what you can control and what you can't control, because we spend a lot of energy thinking and ruminating about the things we can't control, wasted energy, but instead to say, what can I control? What are some things that I can do? One example I'll give that would be helpful around the career path, because I know that that's maybe very relevant to this group, is do some trades with people. We all have professional skills, and we could really assist each other by, hey, if you help me with social media, I'll help you with some business consulting. That's even come out in this pandemic, because similar to Serena's work, I'm usually found traveling around the country, going into organizations and doing training and development. And obviously I can't travel during this time. I can't meet in person during this time. So I've had to pivot. I had a lot of coaching already over Zoom, but I've had to really pivot. And so what I've been doing is doing a lot more online workshops and virtual trainings. And just through the pandemic, I was able to do it personally, where something that I had to offer was helping their business, and something they had to offer was helping my business. And I think that is something, especially for those that are concerned financially about being able to afford to hire somebody, or if there's a skill that you need to learn and somebody else has it, do a trade. I think people are more generous and have more time now than they ever have. So that's a really creative way of building your skill set so that you're ready for whatever it is that's concerning you. And then I'll just jump quickly over to, what's the silver lining? A lot of times we say we want to be certain things, and this is providing an opportunity to actually become it. I want to be somebody who's resilient, but if I don't have to go through something that forces me to develop it, I can't learn resilience from a book. I can't manage stress from reading about it in a book. I actually have circumstances that develop in me. Who's to say that you're not being prepared for what's next for you, that you're not developing a skill set and a character to be able to handle the next level of where you're headed. So I would just really focus on what you can control, and I think that you'll find that you start feeling like you've got your power back again.
I love it. That's nice. James, any final thoughts, my friend?
Yes, for sure. Serena and Elise just touched on so many good ones. So I will add in to the whole notion that frustration and uncertainty, they feel so strong when reality doesn't align with our expectations. So that's just another reason to double down on self-care mentally and physically. And one thing I've heard and read during this time is people either feel more humanized or more dehumanized based on their interactions. So let's really support each other and strive for the former. And to end it off with some silver linings, I would say my favorite thing has been global connection. I was at a virtual conference this morning, first of which are way more frequent, way more accessible and affordable than before. And in the span of 45 minutes, I met amazing individuals from Mexico, Canada, Singapore, Malaysia, Belgium that I probably never would have met. So that's really, really incredible. And just the resiliency and that time to pause and reflect on our lives. I hope, especially for the little ones, this is just a little blip in their childhood and their memory, but I know for all of us that live through it, just really hope that it's something that we go stronger through together.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. Okay, we are winding down here. So what I'd like to do, number one, thank you very much, Serena, Elise, and James, for your knowledge, your expertise, giving back. This is definitely what San Diego Tech Hub is about. The fact that you were able just to volunteer your time this evening. Thank you, community, so much for joining. I know it was at the end of the day. Great turnout. Really appreciate at least the participation. The fact that you're here and attending, just continues to motivate, San Diego Tech Hub and the leadership team to continue to provide great content and work with wonderful folks like our panelists to, give you content that you can use to help better your lives. I want to spend, if you all can just hang on with me for just a few more minutes, panelists, if you could spend just your 1-minute pitch on talking about some of the resources, how people can get into contact with you, just because we didn't have time for Q&A. But if there were some follow-up questions, I know there's some free resources that you have. Could you just kind of promote yourselves a little bit and see what you have for the community and how you're giving back? let's start with you first, Serena. We'll just kind of go down the.
Yeah. Absolutely. So first of all, thank you, Claude, and fabulous panel. I mean, what an awesome group of people to get to hang with. And for all of you, I also wanted to point out in the chat, because one of my colleagues and actually one of my good friends from grad school is on this, and she's actually offering people to some free licenses to Coursera if you want to upskill. So check it out in the chat too. I just noticed that. Thanks a million, Amy, for doing that. In terms of some stuff that you all can certainly email me about, and I'm happy to share. First of all, pandemic job and career resources. I get asked a lot about just different websites and things that could be helpful to you. So I have some things that we kind of, you know, utilize as career counselors. And if you want a copy of that PDF, email me. If you want to also grab the career resilience quiz, I love this quiz. I think you should definitely take it and take it over and over again and use some of the lower scoring areas as goals for yourself. So email me for that. And then one of the most popular classes I've been teaching recently during the pandemic for companies and organizations is about mastering stress tolerance and how to build that skill. And I want to offer a free webinar opportunity for folks who are part of San Diego Tech Hub. So if you're interested in taking that with me, just email me at serena@careerjourneys.net and I will include you on all that, on all those goodies. So thank you.
Awesome. Elise?
Yep, so you see the word empathy, all caps, and a phone number there. If you text empathy to that phone number, I'm going to give you the hacks that I talked about. 7 empathy hacks, what to say when you don't know what to say. I also have a private Facebook group, Leading with Emotional Intelligence, where I post on an ongoing basis. It's a great community of high-level leaders that are really looking to level up their leadership and learn emotional intelligence. That's something you can just request to join by doing a search on Facebook. By being part of the Facebook group, you will get information as it comes up about free online workshops that I do around the topic of emotional intelligence. We've got an event coming up next month, so we'd love you to be a part of that. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you very much. And James?
Yes, for anyone who would like to connect, please feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat. If you're interested in reading a little bit more about design thinking and user experience research, please check me out on Medium at James Vin. And I've also got some fun articles on creative inspiration. So even if you're not a UXer or not interested in that, I've got things like what we can learn from costume design, or what Michael Jordan's documentary on The Last Dance teaches us about teamwork. So feel free to check it out there. And last but not least, my pride and joy, the San Diego Experience Design Meetup. All the events are free and we welcome folks of all backgrounds. So actually we have a micro conference, we're calling it, coming up on Wednesday, September 16th, and you can get to see tons of UX methods in action. And then on September 23rd next month, another advantage of the situation, we're bringing in a design research manager from Dropbox to talk about how you can really make UX findings and recommendations live on within the hearts and minds of your stakeholders. So please check us out on Meetup for more info on those events.
Awesome. Just another example of what San Diego Tech Hub is bringing: connecting people, informing people, and empowering people. So thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it all. And until next month, I will hope to see you all soon.